Well, thank you everybody for coming. I want to talk in fairly general terms tonight about mineralisation in the Ok Tedi district, because it's a fairly well-known place, but it's kind of hard to get to. So everybody sort of knows something about it, but not all that many people get to visit it. I've been fortunate to be working there for the last 12 years, I think, on and off as a consultant, just going up periodically and reviewing the drill core. This is Mount Fubalan back in 1978 through in the exploration phase. You can see it was an obvious vegetation anomaly from the beginning. And those are all the drill platforms you can see there. And the old, oh, wrong one. And the original Hong Kong camp on top of the mountain there. In the background there you can see Mount Andrew, which we'll talk about later. I want to acknowledge a number of people who have, contributed to what I'm going to talk about, and of course they include Oscar Rarua, who's the Geology and Exploration Manager, Rob Smiley, a former Exploration Manager, Mike Ursig, who you all know, former Exploration Manager, Peter Alubis, who's currently an advisor to Geology and Exploration and has effectively been the Exploration Manager for the past 3 or 4 years. And the geochronology I'm going to talk about was done by Holly Stein with the rhenium-osmium dating, and Mark Fanning for the uranium-lead dating. As I say, my role is more of a support role. I generally go and review the drill core and talk to the exploration manager about what's happening and what I think about where to go next, those sorts of things. But at the same time, I kind of nibble away at, trying to understand the geology and mineralisation better. And one way to do that has been through doing this detailed geochronology. I'll talk a little briefly on the regional geology and then move to the Ok Tedi mine, Townsville, Skarn, Breccia, the Wellington Skarn, and the New York Breccia gold deposit, and then briefly on the ages of all of these things. Ok Tedi was discovered by Kennecott Exploration in 1968. It's now owned 100% by the state of Papua New Guinea, Western Province government and local landowners. It's been producing gold for now, 40 years. Copper exploration, not quite so long. In any terms you like, Ok Tedi is a world-class deposit. It's already produced 5 million tonnes of copper and 15 or nearly 16 million ounces of gold, and it's still got a resource of about over 400 million tonnes at 0.58 copper and that should be 0.67 gold. It's got slightly more gold than copper. And the current production rate is around 20 million tonnes a year, so there's some 20 years of production remaining if that can all be converted to a mineable resource. Okay, Ok Tedi, situated in the highlands of Papua New Guinea in the fold and thrust belt that runs along the sort of spine of the island. Ok Tedi is Pliocene in age, unlike a lot of the other porphyry systems in Papua New Guinea that are Miocene. Don't really want to talk about much about that. This is zooming in a bit. This is a map going from the Nong River in the north through Mount Ian complex and the Ok Tedi complex down here to Mount Andrew in the south. it's a kind of north-northeast trend of the intrusions that corresponds to what's called as the Ok Tedi transfer, which is a structure defined by geophysical data that's more or less perpendicular to the subduction zone that existed previously. I should say that Ok Tedi, formed post-subduction when in the late Miocene or early Pliocene, the tectonics changed to essentially transcurrent faulting. So it's a post-subduction porphyry system. The main rock types in the region are, I keep pressing this wrong one, sorry. The important ones for us are these late Jurassic to Cretaceous theine group, which in the Ok Tedi district is represented by the Eru siltstone, the Eocene to Miocene Darai limestone, and the Middle Miocene Pinyang formation, which is mostly calcareous and sometimes carbonaceous siltstones and mudstones. The intrusions in the area are mostly Miocene to Pleistocene in age. We come in a bit closer, and this is the area I'll be talking about essentially. The Eru formation here is shown in green, the Darai limestone in this other darker green, Pinyang formation in this brown colour, and various intrusions in these different reds and purples. The main intrusive complexes are the Mount Ian complex up here, the Ok Tedi complex down here, and some of the other main intrusions are the New York monzodiorite and the Ok Gilo monzodiorite. The whole tectonic development of the system resulted in southwest directed thrusting during the late Miocene and early Pliocene, and that resulted in this series of thrust sheets and folds with sort of northwest, southeast oriented axial planes. You can see here's the Ok Tedi anticline going through the mine area, which is down here, and another syncline going through the Townsville area up here. Okay, let's look at Ok Tedi, and it was always thought of as a porphyry copper gold system, but when you look in detail at it, it's actually made up of 4 different types of mineralization. There's an early stage of skarn formation, which is the Gold Coast and Paris-Berlin skarns. There's what I called the Siltstone Ridge porphyry system. I think back in the early days, they recognised this porphyry system in the southern part of the pit, and it's called the Southern Porphyry. Then there's the Fouberland porphyry system, which is centred on Mount Fouberland, and the latest is the Taranaki skarn. This is the mine area, essentially, and it's made up of a number of different intrusions. This is the Gold Coast skarn and endoskarn associated with that down in this area. This is the Berlin Paris skarn on this side. The Fouberland porphyry is centred on the Fouberland quartz monzonite porphyry, and it has a central barren quartz core, which I'll show you shortly. There are very extensive, or sorry, the Siltstone Ridge porphyry system. Part of it is exposed up here at Siltstone Ridge, and the other part is down here near what's called the Ningi quartz monzonite porphyry, and extends into this darker unit here, the Sydney monzodiorite, and the Kalgoorlie monzodiorite. What else do I need to say? The stratigraphy, there's repetition of the stratigraphy due to thrusting, and over on the right-hand side there is the model of Mason back in the, what is it, 90s, where he thinks the Eru siltstone has been thrust up into the overlying Darrai limestone. So this results in, if we look in this area here, which is essentially the mine area, we go through siltstone, limestone, again into siltstone and limestone again. And that's controlled by two thrusts, the Taranaki thrust, which is this one that runs all around the outside of the mine, and the Parrot's Beak thrust, which is exposed down here. I'll show you, it's easier to see in cross-section in a moment. This is the mine a few years ago now. Just to give you an idea of the layout, this is looking north towards Townsville and the Mount Ian complex in the distance there. So the mill is off over to the side here. The mine offices used to be here and have now been moved up here to make way for another cutback. The Gold Coast skarn occurs along this wall of the pit, and the Berlin Paris skarn along this wall of the pit. The Fouberland porphyry is in this area here. There's Siltstone Ridge. Now, well, a lot of it's been mined away, actually. And Sulphide Creek is over the back there. And this is New York Ridge, which we'll look at in more detail later. Just some examples of the intrusive rocks and the way you can, you know, clearly see contacts between different intrusions. And for example, here, what you can see, the Sydney monzodiorite strongly altered, intruded by Kalgoorlie monzodiorite, which is much less altered. So we know already we've got older alteration and perhaps mineralization. Here's another contact between this Kalgoorlie monzodiorite and the Ningi quartz monzonite porphyry. And just to mention that the Fouberland quartz monzonite porphyry over here is a multi-phase intrusion, and this is a finer grained porphyritic dike. Okay, the Gold Coast and Berlin skarns wrap around what's essentially the Sydney monzodiorite in the middle there. Consists mostly of magnetite skarn in the altered Darrai limestone and garnet endoskarn in the Sydney monzodiorite. The garnet endoskarn commonly has veins with, excuse me, quartz magnetite sulfides. The skarn here is mostly magnetite and later chalcopyrite filling in between the magnetite. In the Eru siltstone in the vicinity of the skarn, we also get a lot of sulfide veins with K-feldspar alteration and quartz magnetite commonly. The Siltstone Ridge porphyry system is a bunch of veins and breccias centered on the, probably anyway, on the Ningi quartz monzonite porphyry, but it extends to Siltstone Ridge where we see similar veins, but it also grades into pyrite-rich veins as we go out further away. So I suspect this system as, you know, it's older than the Fouberland porphyry system. So the Fouberland porphyry system has essentially come up through an older porphyry system. This is just to show it from a different angle here. This is Siltstone Ridge and Sulphide Creek down here. New York Ridge. Oh, sorry, this is New York Ridge. This is Moscow up there. The Gold Coast skarn is down in there. So as we come out this way, we get into increasingly pyrite-rich veins going away from the centre of the system. The thing that really gave this away as being a different system is rocks like this, where you get, this is Sydney Monza diorite, and it's got, in this area here, you can see this, it's sericite chloride epidote alteration of Sydney Monza diorite, and that's on the outer part of the garnet endoskarn. And clearly it's overprinted here by this biotite alteration and veins with biotite, magnetite, chalcopyrite, quartz, and so on. So we've got a porphyry style veins here that are younger than the Gold Coast skarn. And at Siltstone Ridge, we get veins. This is a molly-rich vein here with K-feldspar alteration in what's essentially biotite-altered siltstone. Okay, the Fouberland porphyry system, as I said, is multi-phase system in terms of intrusive events. Most of the copper mineralization is associated with secondary biotite alteration. There's no stockwork vein system like in Southwest US porphyry systems. There are a few veins with chalcopyrite and bornite, but the majority of the sulfides occur with secondary biotite alteration in the porphyry, which grades into what you could call a xenolithic porphyry, and that grades into hydrothermal breccias. I'll show you those. There's a later quartz core, and that's overprinted by very minor veins of chalcopyrite and molybdenite. This is the typical Fouberland quartz monzonite porphyry, and you can see clearly all this secondary biotite alteration, and that's associated with chalcopyrite. There are also things like this, which has got an igneous matrix and lots of xenoliths. And some of those xenoliths you can see are actually veins, or they have veins and alteration within them. And those are parts of the older Siltstone Ridge porphyry system, incorporated now as fragments in the Fouberland monzonite porphyry. And that grades into things like this, which is now, really it's a hydrothermal breccia, but it has the matrix of the breccia is really just Fouberland monzonite porphyry all over again, albeit sort of ground up. And there are some minor veins that overprint that. Here's some of that breccia with an igneous matrix and mixed fragments again. And you can see it's overprinted by these quartz veins. This is the outer part of the quartz core, which, as we go along, sorry about that, as you move into the quartz core, it becomes progressively more and more dominated by quartz veins. And the intrusive rock here becomes progressively more strongly altered to K-feldspar. So the quartz core is maybe 200 meters in diameter, and it's essentially a quartz rock with some relics of the Fouberland monzonite porphyry. And rarely it's cross-cut by sulfide veins with chalcopyrite, pyrite, and molybdenite. And there's also some very late more or less molybdenite paint on fracture surfaces. And this was to remind me to say the mine is still within the zone of partial supergene enrichment. So there is chalcocite on some of the fracture surfaces. Okay. Now the Taranaki skarn is comes along the Taranaki thrust between the Iru siltstone and the Darai limestone. It forms endoskarn within the Fubaland quartz monzonite porphyry, so it appears to be younger than that. The source is still uncertain, but appears to be somewhere in the Sulphide Creek area. And the absolute age is not known yet. It doesn't contain molybdenite. And subsequent to putting this in, I think it contains mineralization of different ages in different places. This is the just a pit model here, and it just shows the distribution of the Taranaki skarn. It's as I said, it runs along the thrust, so it's been mined away or eroded away in here. And this is a plot of thickness of it, so just to show the distribution. It's quite extensive and effectively went over the top of the Fubaland porphyry system, which I think was very, very important for the supergene enrichment story, because this is essentially massive pyrite and massive pyrrhotite for the most part, and that was exposed at the original surface and provided a fantastic vehicle for leaching and supergene enrichment. So Ok Tedi started out originally as an oxide gold operation, and then transitioned into a copper mining operation on the very rich supergene blanket in the Fubaland porphyry. And I think the whole reason for that was this tremendous source of sulfides to provide the acid during supergene weathering. This is just the same slide we had before. Oh, Taranaki skarn. Sorry. Most of the Taranaki skarn's been mined away now. There's just some in this area here, which originally would have gone right over the pit, over the porphyry systems. It's very, I'll show you, it's very rich in, for the most part, it's kind of massive magnetite or massive sulfides, particularly pyrrhotite, and in some cases pyrite. It's very gold rich, which is why it's kind of very popular in the mine. But it's also has because of the pyrite, it creates a lot of environmental problems, because you end up with a massive amount of pyrite to get rid of. That's another story. As we head towards Sulphide Creek, it becomes more of a finer pyroxene garnet skarn in the Darai limestone, and there are, as you can see here, garnet veins within the New York monzodiorite. So it looks as though, as you go towards Sulphide Creek, you're going from essentially the later magnetite sulfide stage into the earlier calc-silicate stage. When I went and dated all those, we did very precise rhenium osmium majors, and you can see these things have uncertainties of sort of 2,000 to 5,000 years for the most part. So you get a very, very good picture of the mineralization. These are ages from the Gold Coast skarn and those associated veins in the Iru siltstone. Siltstone Ridge porphyry system here from both the veins I showed you in Sydney monzodiorite and the molybdenite veins from Siltstone Ridge that I also showed you. And here are some ages from the Fouberland porphyry system. That's that late molybdenite paint. That's the veins cross-cutting the quartz core. And these are from the sort of secondary biotite alteration in Fouberland monzonite porphyry. So you can see each of these systems was active for, 10 to 20,000 years, essentially. And they were separated in time by perhaps even greater periods. So in most older deposits, this sort of 200,000 year range of ages for these three systems here, three completely different systems, would be lost within the uncertainties of the age dates. So you might recognise that you have these systems, but you wouldn't be able to date them effectively. You wouldn't be able to separate them one from the other. So I think this is a pretty remarkable set of data. Holly Stein is over the moon about it. Righto, let's go to Townsville. Townsville was discovered in the late 80s by BHP during a stream sediment program, and they established a significant gold resource, sort of plus 1 million ounces, and left it at that. In about 2014, Rob Smiley was tasked with starting up exploration in the near mine area. Ok Tedi had been exploring in New Britain and all over PNG, everywhere except around the mine. But in about that time, this all changed. And one of the first things he did was follow up one of the deep BHP holes, finished up with some copper mineralization in the bottom. And so Rob drilled, I didn't put the hole number, anyway, it doesn't matter, and finished up with this. These were the intercepts. In the upper part, 46 metres of 6 grams gold and not much copper. And further down the hole, 80 metres of 1.67 copper and 1.27 gold. So that established the presence of a very significant copper gold silver zone beneath the gold zone at Townsville, and so started a whole new exploration phase. Townsville is hosted within the Pinyang Formation, siltstones and mudstones, and it appears to have formed in 3 main stages. There are early calc-silicate hornfells, which I think are due to probably formed during intrusion when fluids circulated through the siltstones. There's no mineralization. There's what I've been calling early skarn, which again is not mineralized. It's got an upper clinopyroxene epidote-rich zone and lower garnet-rich zone. And there's skarn breccia, and this is what hosts the mineralization. And it ranges from, in the bottom, anhydrous calc-silicate skarn breccia, so dominated by clinopyroxene and garnet, an intermediate hydrous calc-silicate skarn, and an upper quartz carbonate adularia zone, which is the gold zone. The copper is down in this zone and the gold is up in this zone, fundamentally. This is just an aerial shot looking back. This is the Ok Tedi mine back here. It's about 4 kilometres away. And part of the gold zone is here and part of the copper zone is underneath there. But just to give you an idea of the terrain, all the exploration around Ok Tedi is helicopter supported. There's no other way to do it. It's very expensive exploration. This is part of the Mount Ian complex over here, and these are the zones, the gold zones at surface. There are 3 of them. There is skarn formed over here at Amethyst Creek, both calc-silicate and magnetite skarns. This is mapping from and compilations by Richard Yongans, I should point out. There is, what's he got here? There's calc-silicate alteration that we'll see shortly is fairly widespread. And there is also some calc-silicate vein networks. Calc-silicate skarns, these are essentially bedding parallel skarns in calcareous units. What else worth mentioning? That'll do. Just a few of the rock types. This is the calc-silicate hornfells. It's layer parallel alteration where we get pervasive K-feldspar alteration in the mudstone layers, and in the more siltstone-rich horizons, we get clinopyroxene epidote alteration fundamentally, but no sulfides to speak of. I think that's just hot water going around. The early skarn I mentioned, it's got an upper zone of, this is pervasive over sort of tens of meters. It's got upper clinopyroxene epidote rich zone. This is the bedding, or the layering along here, and it's associated with K-feldspar, a second generation of K-feldspar alteration that overprints the early calc-silicate hornfells. And lower in the system, it turns into brown garnet alteration. This is the skarn breccia, and I don't know if you can read these well from where you are, but these are some of the intercepts that essentially drilled by BHP. 118 meters of 5.1 grams. I think there's one over here. 142 meters of 3 grams. There's really big intercepts of good grade mineralization. And this cross section, sorry, I didn't point that out. This is a cross section through here. The quartz carbonate adularia zone is essentially the gold zone, part of the gold zone, at least up the top. The hydrous skarn assemblage, which is here, actinolite epidote, hosts some of the gold mineralization, and the clinopyroxene garnet skarn down the bottom here hosts copper gold mineralization. So at deeper levels, we get garnet dominant infill with, in this case, calcite and a few sulfides. Higher up, we get clinopyroxene dominant infill with some garnet here, and this is the early clinopyroxene epidote of the early skarn. The copper mineralization is really fascinating in this because you get this cyclical growth of chalcopyrite and pyrrhotite. This is pyrrhotite and chalcopyrite here, and in between you get growth of clinopyroxene crystals. And this is all infill within a breccia, I should say. And it's all open space filling. Here's a couple of other examples. Here you get all these clinopyroxene crystals growing off the fragment over here, and some sulfides filling in between. And again, a narrow band of sulfides, then a layer of clinopyroxene, and then later chalcopyrite pyrrhotite. And just to give you an idea of the sorts of numbers we're talking about, this is that old BHP hole where they got this nice zone of copper mineralization deeper down, sort of near 400 meters. This is a more recent hole where there's sort of a getting up for 100-meter zone of copper mineralization with some pretty good grades. When we go up into the hydrous calc-silicate zone, it's mostly the actinolite, epidote, and ilvaite, this black mineral here, which is a hydrous calc-silicate, together with chlorite, and we get some chalcopyrite, but it's mostly sphalerite, galena, pyrite, and some hematite. So it appears to get more oxidized going up the system. We had magnetite lower down, now we've got some hematite up here, and pyrrhotite lower down, and now mostly pyrite up here. And then we go up into the quartz carbonate adularia zone, where we've got similar sulfides, but quite commonly tetrahedrite tennantite as well, with adularia alteration here and quartz carbonate veins with base metal sulfides. This is those same two drill holes again, just plotting all the copper and gold data for the holes, and you see there are two quite different populations. The copper zone here with some gold, and the gold zone with not much copper. And the very top of the system, not much of which is present in the current drilling, we seem to go into a sericite alteration zone where fragments are all altered to sericite. The matrix is starting to look a bit like milled breccia, and it's got sericite quartz within the matrix, as well as some sulfides. This is a model, just to give you an idea, try and put that all together, where I forgot to mention that the deepest drill hole in the project so far went into Darrai limestone underneath. And that was quite garnet rich, early skarn down there. And the breccia contained clasts of lime or marble, effectively, and some of this early skarn. And as we go up, here's the early skarn becoming more clinopyroxene rich. The breccia becomes more clinopyroxene rich in the matrix, and we go up into the hydrous calc-silicate skarn and into the quartz carbonate adularia, and then something that starts to look a bit milled right at the top. Mineralization is copper, gold, silver at the bottom, and gold, silver in these two zones up here. And this is about 800 to 900 meters. Okay, let's go to Wellington. Wellington is a more classic skarn. It's hosted mainly within the Darrai limestone, but it also has some early calc-potassic alteration. There's garnet skarn that appears to be after monzonite, monzodiorite and diorite intrusions. Most of the magnetite skarn appears to be an alteration of Darrai limestone, and the mineralization is dominantly chalcopyrite and pyrite, which closely follows generally after magnetite. The skarn, and this is a sort of recent development, the skarn continues down into the Iru siltstone, and I'll show you some of this, where the siltstone's been brecciated and infilled by garnet, clinopyroxene, and later magnetite and sulfides. And when we get down there in this upper area, most of the garnet is yellow-brown to brown in colour. But as we get down into this deeper material in the Iru siltstone, the garnet is red or red-brown, and is associated with dark green clinopyroxene, which suggests we're getting closer to a deeper fluid source down there in the classic skarn zonation model, which is a surprise because what it suggests is that somewhere down there, there's another limestone horizon, because we've got calc-silicate infill in this breccia, way below the known Darrai limestone. So perhaps there's another thrust sheet with repetition of the stratigraphy. We don't know yet. Okay, the Wellington skarn is over here. This is the mine area. This is the New York monzondiorite I'll talk about shortly. And the Wellington monzondiorite, what's called the East Cheam monzondiorite, which is actually a bit of a porphyry. And the Wellington skarn occurs in here as a series of skarn, endoskarns, and a lot of breccias, a lot of post-mineral breccias. This is some of the Pinyang Formation, siltstone, mudstone material, and it's been calc-potassic altered here with darker clinopyroxene-rich bands and paler K-feldspar-rich bands, and here it's cut by a garnet vein. Not a very good picture. This is Darrai limestone. It's quite a coarse-grained calcite limestone. And that becomes altered to predominantly magnetite here with, here it's got some garnet with overprinting magnetite and chalcopyrite. This one is more just massive magnetite with overprinting chalcopyrite. As we go down into the Iru siltstone, this is the Iru siltstone fragment here. It's brecciated. It's got K-feldspar alteration around the margins, becoming a bit more pervasive in some fragments. And then we've got this garnet, which is sort of red-brown in colour, and later magnetite and sulfides overprinting. Deeper down again, we get into this material, which has got siltstone fragments, now very strongly altered to K-feldspar, and this dark green clinopyroxene and red-brown garnet. So something is telling us, I think, that we're getting closer to a source as we go down. That's 500 metres down that hole. There are a lot of post-mineral breccias. And this is just an example here with limestone fragments, magnetite fragments, and the sort of yellowish brown garnet skarn fragments. They appear to be along faults and things. Just an example here from one of the recent holes, which is just showing copper down hole and showing here what's mainly magnetite skarn after Darrai limestone, and the intercept within this hole was 123 metres at 2.95 copper and a bit over 2 grams gold. So it's pretty worthwhile stuff, if only we can find some more of it. And there we go with gold again in the same hole. So you get some very attractive gold and copper grades in these things. The push is on at the moment. There's a modest resource at Wellington, and the push is on at the moment to expand that resource to something much bigger, to give at least a few years supply for the mill of high grade material, because they're now getting in the mine, in the pit, they're now getting into the area where they're running out of supergene or partial supergene enrichment, getting into the original porphyry system, the porphyry mineralization, which is really 0.3 or less. So they want some higher grade material. Okay, let's move on to the New York breccia. This was discovered in 2017 by a gentleman who's not here tonight, Mike Ersig, when he was exploration manager. Drilled some holes here and kept following up, which really turned out to be worthwhile. It's a sort of 400 metre by 1,500 metre deep breccia body hosted within New York monzonite and Uru siltstone. There's an early breccia with essentially an igneous matrix and extensive K-feldspar alteration, and a later hydrothermal breccia that appears to be zoned. Again, we've got this adularia quartz calcite mineralization, which is gold rich with base metal sulfides. And there's higher up, there's a muscovite chloride epidote alteration infill system. Much less commonly, there's illite pyrite quartz infill within the breccia, and that in the few places I've seen it is mostly out on the periphery of the system. I should mention there's currently a PhD project on the New York breccia. A guy called Jerry Dunga, who's at UWA, working with Stefan Hagman. So that's been going for a little over a year now, and is churning out some really good results. The New York breccia is situated here. There's these skarns at surface, which are probably associated with the Taranaki thrust. There's a bit of the thrust here, around there, and going around the edge of the New York monzonite. But under here is the breccia system. This is a very early cross section, and I put this here to illustrate. There's actually an earlier hole still, SCK-17, had a big intercept of about something between 0.1 and 0.2 gold, and it was followed up with this SCK-22, a slightly steeper angle, which got 152 metres at 0.64, and that was followed up by SCK-30 because it seemed to be getting higher grade as we went down, and that came out with 140 metres at 1.26 grams gold. So then, that set the whole thing off. So there was a lot of drilling after that. There's some really good intercepts of, reasonable grade gold, gram plus gold, but no zones so far of very high grades that would make this thing economic. So even though there's a sizable amount of mineralization, this is like 1,500 meters. The grade is, given where it is and what it is, the grade is a bit low. I can't mention all of that because it hasn't been published. Okay, the igneous breccia has got an igneous matrix and is commonly overprinted by K-feldspar alteration. Some in places it grades into milled breccia with a gritty matrix, and we get different fragment compositions suggesting transport, the fragments. Some are rounded, some are angular, and it ranges from matrix supported to class supported. Here's an example here where we've got different fragments of Uru siltstone and sort of intrusive rocks, some sort, in an igneous matrix. Now we've got some K-feldspar alteration, overprinting. Here's the igneous matrix again, but now we've got K-feldspar alteration overprinting quite a lot of that. The hydrothermal breccia, by contrast, is dominantly brittle fracture and dilation. So we commonly get these sort of triangular shaped fragments where the thing has been fractured and probably pumped up by the hydrothermal fluids. So the mineralization is all infill, within the breccia. There's commonly only one host rock type in one section of the hole, so probably not much transport of fragments. And there tend to be angular fragments, mostly sort of shatter and splintery styles. The mineralization, as I said, it's mostly within this quartz carbonate adularia. There's some adularia crystals in a cavity with calcite, some quartz down here, mostly pyrrhotite and sphalerite going along with that, and alteration around the edges of the fragments. Higher up, we tend to get this material which is more dominated by sericite, chlorite. It's pyrite rather than pyrrhotite, and once again there's in places hematite in this material, whereas in the deeper adularia rich zone there's in places magnetite. That's another one with quartz carbonate, pyrite, and this material here is a dark green chlorite. And quite rarely we get this illite pyrite rich infill, sometimes with sort of sideritic carbonate. The breccias are cut by a variety of veins. The most common ones are carbonate, pyrite, sphalerite type veins. So mineralogy that's rather similar to that in the breccia, the earlier breccia. Rarely we get coliform banded quartz carbonate veins like this, and in places there are rhodochrosite veins as well. And this is a calcite pyrrhotite vein. There are a bunch of what appear to be late to syn mineral dikes, which were called Gurley dikes, because at the time Mike was going through a little town in New South Wales called Gurley when the drillers wanted to stop, and he said, no, keep going, and it went through back into the breccia again. So these dikes have clasts of the mineralized material within them. Here you can see pyrite in these clasts and carbonate and quartz. So they appear to be syn mineral timing. And there's just a close-up of a bunch of clasts within the Gurley dikes. But the key thing is they are also cut by these sphalerite veins that also overprint the breccia. They are closely linked in time, I think, to the hydrothermal breccia. Interestingly, at the bottom of the system, these, you can see here, these are 960 meters down this drill hole. This is a very, very steep drill holes. We see these things, which are quartzite fragments. They're rounded quartzites. And within our stratigraphic section, there are no quartzites. This is totally unlike the Eru siltstone. And the unit below the Eru siltstone is the Toro sandstone, which is the major gas reservoir in this part of Papua New Guinea. And my suspicion is that these are fragments of Toro sandstone. And if that's true, then the fluids that formed this deposit came up through a gas reservoir into the overlying Eru siltstone and New York monzodiorite, and formed the mineralization. We have no evidence, no direct evidence of a porphyry system underneath New York. Oop. Yes, do that. This is, I mentioned Jerry Dunga, the PhD student at UWA, and this is his first go at a cross-section of New York. And he's got slightly different zoning that I talked about. It's got chlorite muscovite up here, He's got a biotite K feldspar zone and then the Adularia zone underneath that. He's got gold mineralization essentially at the bottom with a little bit of copper and moly, gold again, and gold silver at the top. Zinc, essentially zinc rich mineralization, and then a bit more copper at depth. But the copper grades are very, very low overall. Okay, just to finish off, and I'm sorry to go on and on. This is the ages of intrusive rocks in the Ok Tedi district. And this work is all done by Mark Fenning at ANU, or formerly at ANU. And I've just arranged them in order of the age. But the interesting thing, if you think back to the map, this is Cowell, the most northerly prospect, Mount Ian, the most northerly intrusive complex, and Townsville. Then there's a gap in this area here around 1.8 million years, and we get into New York, Conjubit, which is next door to Wellington, into Wellington and so on. All the New York, Wellington intrusions are in this band through here. Then we get into the Ok Tedi mine area through here, and then Mount Andrew further to the south. So we have this, it's not a perfect thing by any stretch of the imagination, but as we go from north to south, the intrusions become progressively younger and cover an age span of about, what is that, maybe 800,000 years through there. When we look at the Molly ages, we see the same thing. From Townsville through New York. Sorry, I didn't mention these in the New York and Wellington monzodiorites. There are porphyry style veins, by which I mean quartz and magnetite sulfide veins with K feldspar alteration that appear to be older than the New York breccia and older than the Wellington skarn. They're very sparse, but that's their age. Here's some mollies from the Wellington skarn and the underlying siltstone. This is the age of one of the Gurley dikes. I haven't found a molly in the New York breccia, so I use that as a proxy. Fortunately, Jerry Dunga found some molly, and we've since dated that, but that's his story to tell. Here back into the mine areas, the Gold Coast skarn, Siltstone Ridge, Buberland. So once again, as we go from north to south, we get this progressive younging of the mineralization, directly dated here between 1.6 and about 1.1 mineralization. So 500,000 years. When we use some of the intrusions as proxies, so things where I haven't managed to find any molybdenite yet, but the intrusions are overprinted by mineralization, we get an even sort of larger story where Betep is a skarn in the Mount Ian complex. Quang is something I haven't mentioned, it's further off to the west. But they're 1.9, 1.8 million years old. Then we come down into the Townsville area, the New York porphyry things. I haven't mentioned Moscow skarn or Darien porphyry. They're in Darien porphyry's in Sulphide Creek, and then into the Wellington and so on we go. And finally down here into the Andrew porphyry system. The problem with the Andrew porphyry system is we're way too high up in the system, I think, and we haven't been able to find any effective way to vector towards the mineralization. And we don't know how deep it might be underneath. So, in conclusions, finally, the mineralisation in the district formed over a period of about 800,000 years, and the intrusions and mineralisation show a general decrease from north to south over that time period. And mineralisation at Ok Tedi is made up of 2 episodes of skarn mineralisation and 2 porphyry systems. Townsville is very unusual because it's zoned from essentially a copper gold skarn breccia to a quartz carbonate adularia gold deposit. New York is also a quartz carbonate adularia gold deposit, but it doesn't have any, we don't know of any porphyry source underneath. We don't have any evidence yet of something underneath. Wellington is a more classic copper gold skarn with some evidence now for a deeper fluid source within or below the Yeru siltstone. So thank you very much. Sorry to go on and on.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have any questions on the floor while the punters at home quickly type some questions? Rob Torp.
Actually, my question is not really a question. It's more just some feedback. It was a really fantastic presentation, Pete. I really enjoyed that. You've really presented that so well. I've always been intrigued by Ok Tedi. And now it's opening up my mind to some similar sort of things that are happening where I'm working, where we are just discovering some skarns that are very closely proximal to porphyries. So I just want to say thanks for a spectacular presentation.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Must be some questions. Here we are. Of course, the other end of the room.
Hi, Peter, thanks. That was a really good talk. I learned a lot. I've been doing geology for a while. I'm definitely not an economic geologist. I was very disappointed you never used the word zircon. You talked about Mark Fanning a fair amount. I assume he was dating zircons. Uranium lead on zircons, was he, Mark?
Sorry, yes, it was.
Yes, yes.
They're all shrimp ages on zircons.
Yes, yes. And these zircons are associated with both the skarns and the intrusions?
No, they're all from the intrusions.
All from the intrusions. Yeah, interesting. But if I were going to go out and look for a new Ok Tedi by scooping up cups of sand at the bottom of hillsides, or if I were in an airplane flying around, zircon is not the first thing that would come to my mind, right? Is that right? Would you, if you were going to look for Ok Tedi today in downstream deposits of various kinds, you'd probably be looking for garnets or...
No, I'd be looking for zircons. If I was Rio Tinto, I'd be looking for zircons.
Okay, that's interesting. So the magnetics are non-distinctive, for instance?
The magnetics are not really detailed enough, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
that
neither is a lot of the other geophysical data.
Yeah.
I personally think we need some very detailed ground magnetics. Well, it's, you know, you can't really do heli-mag because the topography is like this.
Yes,
and, you know, it's very difficult. But probably ground magnetics would.
Maybe a role for drones or something. Yes. Thank you.
I should, a lot of the big companies now, they have very, very detailed knowledge of the geochemistry of zircons that are linked to porphyry systems. It's a very much a fertility indicator of whether the intrusions that you're looking at have the potential to form porphyry systems. So they very much look for, well, any resistate mineral. You know, there's massive amount of work done on those.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for the great talk. I've got a question just generally about the structure which you talked about at the beginning, that's thrust. So is the idea that was all in place prior to this, that's well before this intrusive history, is that right?
Yeah. Some of the intrusions sort of go through the thrust and they don't appear to be offset. So we think.
And the skarn that kind of sits in that whole sheet that just found its way you
Yeah,
know,
I think-
preferentially in that unit.
I think they've been reactivated, and in fact, I think that was dilated because so much of the Taranaki skarn is infill rather than alteration. So
Right.
I think it was
Okay, thanks.
basically vertical dilation.
Thank you. Other questions? One over there.
Peter, your cross-section, your schematic cross-sections showed a pretty standard vertical extent. Is there any evidence of telescoping? And that leads on to a sort of second part of the question is the gaps between the porphyry systems. Do you see them as being tectonic events?
I think they're probably more likely to be intrusive events.
Related to tectonic events?
I think
or-
they're probably more, I didn't really go into the intrusive rocks, but it seems to me that these intrusions we see at the surface are coming from a magma chamber deeper down. We know from the zircon geochronology that we've got, you know, a lot of Archean and Proterozoic zircons in these Pleistocene intrusions. So we know they've interacted extensively with the crust. We also get a bunch of more mafic intrusions, including the Mount Ian Gabbro and various diorites around the place. So I think the whole intrusion story is more linked to this deeper magma chamber where we get mafic magmas coming into a more felsic magma chamber and triggering intrusions to higher levels. And that's got also very significant implications for where the metals and sulfur come from. But that's another day.
And is there any telescope?
Not that I've recognised, no. It seems that these things just grade up. You don't really see them overprinting themselves.
Is that because they're just so short-lived?
Probably, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Sorry, just a quick question on the, is it Daria limestone?
Darai limestone.
Daria limestone. Bearing in mind there's 7 times more carbonate lithologies than there are siliciclastics. Have you got any more detail on what the limestone actually is?
Not really. There was some detailed work done back in the early sort of 70s, 80s.
I mean, would that have implications for skarn development?
It certainly does, in the sense that, in my experience anyway, the best skarns are forming what you might call dirty limestones. So, for example, in the Erzberg district further to the west, a lot of the best skarns occur in units that are sort of calcareous siltstones, if you like, rather than straight up limestones. They form the best skarns, and commonly in that area, the real limestone units aren't particularly well altered to skarn.
Thank you. Last questions? Another one? Yep.
May seem like a fairly simple question. What is the product? Is it some sort of concentrate? How is it transported out? And where is it transported to in terms of customers?
Okay. There are 2 pipelines from the mine down to a place called Bigay, which is down on the lowlands. So the concentrate goes in a pipeline down to Bigay, which is, I think, 90 kilometres, something like that, where it's then dried and loaded onto barges. It goes down the Fly River for 800 kilometres and to Port Moresby, where it's loaded onto ships. And I think it's sold mostly in Korea and perhaps Japan. There's another pipeline which also goes to Bigay, which they call the Pecan, and that's the pyrite-rich concentrate, which they want to get rid of. And that goes down to Bigay, and that gets buried in massive pits below the water table. All the tailings go into the local river, and they go down, so into, what's it called, Okmani and Sulphide Creek, eventually into the Ok Tedi River, and eventually down to the lowlands. And they've got to cut a huge slot in the bottom of the Ok Tedi River, and they have a full-time dredge, a massive dredge there that sucks all the tailings out again and forms these big pads of, very, very extensive things, which are then revegetated. So they dump all the tailings in there, and all the people in the meantime pan gold in it all the way down. And then at the bottom, they suck it all out and sort of reclaim it all.
Thank you. I think we're probably good for finishing there. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone at home. See ya.